Okay, good evening. Tonight we do our Chazzarah on this week's quota, Hilchos Melicha, Simin Samach Tes, Seifim Zayin through your Dalit. And as I mentioned on Sunday, there are really two subjects here. Subject one is the process of removing the salt from the meat after it's been properly salted, as discussed last week, the proper process of salting. And the second section of today's quota, this week's quota, is the halachas of b'di'evid if a person didn't salt it and what happens then. Okay, so Siv Zayin begins. Before a person puts the meat into the bowl or into the vessel, utensil that he's going to wash it off, right? You just salted the meat. It's covered in salt. You obviously don't want to cook it that way. So you're going to remove the salt before you cook it. And besides you're going to wash it off, right? Besides you don't want to have the salt there. There's blood in the salt. You can't eat, so you're going to have to wash it off. So the Shulchan Aruch is assuming that you're going to be putting that meat into a keli to wash it off. Now, as the Shach tells us from the Rashba, we learned this on Sunday, we are concerned that if you wash it off in a utensil, in a bowl that doesn't have any holes in the bottom of it, it's not a strainer, then the blood, the water will cause the meat to stop producing blood, and then the blood's going to go back in because the salt's still there. That's the Rashba's concern, right? Remembering that people aren't doing this in butcheries and in abattoirs. They're doing this in their home. So if a person doesn't have a strainer and he ends up washing out the meat after it's been salted in a regular bowl in a sink, or whatever the version of a sink was back then, there's a concern that the blood will go back in. And therefore, says Shulchan Aruch, before you put it into the bowl to wash it off, you have to shake off all the salt that's on it, or rinse it so that it washes off. So before you put it into the bowl to do a proper washing, which we'll do in a minute, before you do that, remove the salt. Either remove the salt by shaking it off, or remove the salt by washing it off. Then afterwards, then you can put the meat into the bowl or into the utensil, into the vessel, the keli that you're going to wash it in. Then wash it twice in the bowl. And rinse out the vessel between each washing. So what you're doing is, according to Shulchan Aruch, as follows: you salted the meat, as we discussed last week. You shake the salt off or rinse it off, and then you put it into a bowl, wash it once, empty the bowl out, rinse the bowl out, and then wash it a second time. Wash the meat a second time. That's what you're doing. So 3 steps to the process: remove salt, wash twice, and between each washing, you're rinsing. So it's 4 steps. Remove the salt, wash in a bowl, rinse the bowl out, wash in a bowl. That's the way the Shulchan Aruch puts it. The Yeshayim says the Ramah, there are those that say you have to wash it 3 times. And this is indeed the way our practice is in the first instance. So if you stopped at this point from the Ramah, you would think that the Ramah says, instead of washing twice after shaking off the salt, wash it 3 times after shaking off the salt. That's what you would think the Ramah means if you just stopped here. Because Yeshayim is adding a new opinion. Shulchan Aruch said twice washing after removing the salt, and comes to Ramah and says 3 times. But Ramah continues as follows, and this raises the discussion amongst the Shach and Taz and other Mefarshim on the Shulchan Aruch, what the Ramah means in the next line. Because Ramah continues, Al Kain, therefore, you should shake it off. You should rinse it off. Or shake it off. Hamelach, the salt, Allah, from the meat. And then wash it twice. What does he say? What does Shulchan Aruch say to do? Shake it off. So what did Ramah say to do? Shake it off and then wash it twice, which is what the Shulchan Aruch said to do. So where's the argument? Because that's considered 3 times. So the Ramah begins his statement saying wash it 3 times as if he's arguing with the Mechaber, and then says, and therefore do exactly what the Mechaber just said, which is 3 times. So is there an argument or no argument? And indeed, the Taz writes, there's not an argument. He's just saying that there's an opinion which says 3 times. And therefore, make sure to follow what the Shulchan Aruch said, wash twice after removing the salt. And the Ramah is saying there's an opinion to wash 3 times. And by the way, what the Shulchan Aruch said covers that opinion anyway. That's where the Taz phrases it, as if the Ramah is not arguing. Okay? So the Taz says no argument, and that there is indeed an opinion which is to wash 3 times, and the washing of 3 times can be done just as the Shulchan Aruch said to do, which is remove the salt and then wash twice, and that's counted as 3. However, the Taz says as follows. The Taz is not satisfied with that explanation of the Shach, and says that when the Ramah writes, first the Ramah writes, you have to wash the 3 times, the opinion which says to wash it 3 times rather than 2 times. Then he says, therefore, shake it off or rinse it off, which is the same thing as the Mechaber. Rinse off the salt or shake off the salt and then rinse it twice, then wash it twice. The Taz says you should read the Shulchan Aruch like this. He says that there's a printing mistake, and it should say as follows. Al-Kain, therefore, you should rinse it off, and shake it off, which means that Ramah is adding a crucial detail, that if you want to cover 3 times washing, you can't just remove the salt by either rinsing it or shaking it. You have to do both. If you rinse and shake it off, that will count as your first washing, and then you can wash 2 more times. Whereas if you do what the Mechaber said, which is remove the salt by either rinsing or shaking, and then wash twice, that only counts as 2 washing. Right? So let's summarize. Shach says, no argument. Ramah is just explaining how you cover 3 washings by following the Mechaber's instruction, which is to remove the salt first by either washing or by either rinsing, like, spraying it down, either by rinsing or shaking it. That counts as 1 wash, and then wash twice in the bowl. That's the way the Shach understands the Ramah, interpreting the Mechaber and saying that when the Mechaber's instruction covers 3 washings. Whereas Taz says there's a machlokes. Mechaber says, step 1, either rinse or shake and then wash 2 times. Whereas the Ramah says, rinse and shake and then wash 2 times. Because that first rinse and shake will count as washing number 1, and then 2 more washings, and you have the 3 washings that he requires. Continue back to the Ramah. Or another way to cover 3 washings is by putting the water into the keli first, and then put the meat in, and rinse it out and wash it 3 times. And this is the custom. So the Ramah is saying, instead of let's say that we're taking the Taz interpretation, instead of rinsing and shaking off and then washing twice, put the water in the bowl first, put it in. That's already washing number 1, and then you wash it. Sorry, you put the water in first, right? And then washing it 3 times is the proper way to do it. That's the way the Taz understands it. The proper way to do it is put the water in first, and then wash it 3 times. Okay. So 2 options according to the Ramah. Or I should say, the way Taz is phrasing it, the better way of washing 3 times is actually to wash 3 times by putting the water in first. Or rinse and shake, that's wash 1 and then wash twice. That would be Ramah. Whereas Mechaber says rinse or shake off to remove the salt and then wash twice. Continues the Ramah, and the best case scenario, put a lot of water when you're doing the first washing that is in the bowl. So that way you eliminate the power of the salt that is in the juice. And the water has that counter effect on the salt, which was extracting the meat, the blood, and which could, as per the Rashba's concern, cause the blood to go back in if it's not washed off properly. So therefore he says put a lot of water to blunt the power of the salt. Continues the Ramah, one can use juice as their washing agent. It doesn't have to be water. Doesn't need to be water. If you didn't do step 1, you didn't shake it off, you didn't rinse it off, you just went straight to washing. Ain't lesser. You don't have to forbid the meat. Because the water in the bowl that you're washing is anyways going to neutralize the power of the salt. So it's true that in the first instance you should be concerned with the Rashba's problem, and you want to remove the salt before you put it into the bowl where you're washing. But if you didn't, it's okay. The water will cancel out the power of the salt anyway and won't cause the blood to go back in. Then Ramah takes it even lower. Even if the water is very little, even if there's only a little bit of water in that bowl, even that little bit of water is enough to neutralize the power of the salt. And if you skip the step of removing the salt first, it's okay as long as there's a little bit of water in that bowl where you're washing, which is going to be. And therefore it continues. Even if you put the meat into a bowl without removing the salt, and there's no water in that bowl, you just put it in there. We don't have to be worried that in such a short order, the salt's going to cause the blood to go back in, because you're putting it in the bowl and you're going to wash it off very shortly. So it's not as if we're so concerned of the Rashba's consideration that the blood's going to go back in. Even if you forgot to put the water in the bowl first, and you forgot to shake off the salt, and you just put it into an empty bowl and then put some water to shake it off, to wash it out, it's okay. That short amount of time is not going to cause the blood to go back in. Again, this is all talking to people who are salting in their homes. So these situations would come up probably very often. Okay, continues that all of this is only a concern with the first washing that's right after the salting. But once you've washed it off once, obviously not going to be a problem. You washed off the salt is washed off, and if you didn't do the second washing as good, it's okay. If you didn't remove the salt after the first washing, also okay, because once you washed it, it's all good. Continues the Ramah, the Ein Chiluk, this is a big chiddush here. There's no difference between a bedicha but clear kosher or treifa cheleves. Whether you washed the salt off the meat, whether you did so in a keli that was kosher, or whether it was a treifa keli, or whether it was a milk keli, there's no problem. What is that? Explains the Shach and Taz, because the keli is clean and there's no hot water, there's no possible transference of flavor, even though there's salt there, not enough to cause transference of flavor, just the salt alone without any heat of any kind. And as the Shach points out, it seems as if even if the kli is ben yoima, which means even if the keli was used in the past 24 hours for milk, within the last 24 hours, or treif, doesn't have any effect on the meat that was washed off in that keli. Right? This is actually a common question people get in the kitchen. I rinsed the meat in the wrong bowl. Okay, so now you know it's fine. Because even rinsing the salt off in a non-kosher bowl, and a milchik bowl is okay, even if the bowl is ben yoima, as the Shach says. But if the vessel was somewhat dirty, then what? So the way Taz puts it, if there's a little bit of water, then it's okay, even if it's a little dirty. Even if there's a little bit of dirt from the non-kosher or whatever, if the water is there, which blunts the power of the salt, it won't cause that non-kosher stuff to go into the meat. Because again, it's clean and you're washing it off. And Taka the Rama continues, if there's a little bit of water in the keli, which neutralizes the power of the salt. This is what the Taz was referring to, which is mentioned. And because the water neutralizes the power of the salt, it no longer has that heating agency to cause absorption. And therefore, even if this keli even has a little dirt left over from the milk or from the non-kosher that was previously used in it, mutter, it's permitted, because there's no heat to cause a transference of flavor from that non-kosher dirt into the meat. At best, it's two cold things touching each other, and when you wash off, as we learned already in Taruvas, non-kosher touching kosher, wash it off and it's all okay, which is what's happening here, because there's no heat, considering that the water neutralized the power of the salt, which would have been the heat in this case. Right? Okay. Test. If a person salted meat and he put it right into a pot, cooking it, forgot to wash the salt off. He started cooking it. So, says the Shulchan Aruch, your pot, the rest of the contents of the pot, has to be 60 times the amount of the salt. Why should it be 60 times the amount of the salt? Two explanations given. Either because the salt becomes nevela, right? The salt is absorbed of blood, it becomes nevela, you have to have 60 times the salt. That's the way the Taz phrases it. However, of course, we already know from the Shulchan Aruch, from the Machaber, from the Shulchan Aruch, that he doesn't say chanan by shari surim. He only says chanan by basar b'chalav. And here, blood is shari surah. So there's no chanan in the salt. Therefore, says the Shach, the real reason is because we don't know how much blood comes out. And therefore, the max amount of volume of blood is going to be the salt, the size of the salt. It can never, in other words, because we don't know how much blood is in that salt, we go to the max amount it possibly could be, which is the volume of the salt. It's not going to be more than the volume of the salt. So as long as you have 60 to the amount of the salt, that's going to for sure be 60 the amount of blood that's there. Okay. But critically, is the main point here is you don't have to have 60 against a piece of meat. Because the meat, the blood's already out, the meat's totally kosher. Not chanan, not even isodavuk, as the Taz points out. Even though the Rashal wants to say it is considered isodavuk, but we reject the Rashal. It's not isodavuk. The blood's been extracted from the meat. It's not considered attached, right? We learned once before that even if we learned it in Taravus, that even the Machaber was of the opinion that there's no chanan b'ashari surim. If it's isodavuk, if the prohibited is attached to the kosher, then the kosher does become chanan because it's attached, even though it's shari surim. But blood is not considered attached in that way because it comes out. Certainly, the salt is not considered attached to the meat because as soon as you put it into the water, the salt starts to dissolve. And therefore, you don't have to have 60 against the piece of meat. You only have to have 60 against the salt that's on the meat because the salt is what contains the blood. Either the salt itself is chanan, or as the Shach says, because we don't know how much blood the salt contains, and at the max, it contains the same volume as the salt itself. So as long as the pot has, or the content of the pot is 60 against the salt, the rest is okay, even though you forgot to wash the salt off, which you should have. Now it says Ramah, all the contents of the pot joins to become the 60 against the salt. Taz points out all the contents of the pot, but not the pot itself. Right? We learned that already in Taruvus, that which is absorbed inside of a pot is not part of a 60 to nullify. Right? That's that which is absorbed in the actual material of the pot. The material of the pot itself is never part of the 60 to nullify. But all the contents of the pot will be joined together to nullify the salt by 60. Even the piece of meat itself, as the Shach explains, even the piece of meat itself, which was salted, blood came out. And that piece of meat is totally kosher. We just didn't rinse off the salt. That piece of meat, too, can join the rest of the contents of the pot to be the 60 against the salt that's on it. Because it itself is totally kosher. And the blood's been extracted. And the blood's only in the salt. We only need to nullify the salt. So the meat which originally produced that blood, the meat which has the salt touch on it, is part of the rest of the content of the pot to be 60 against the salt. Continues. The Ramah tells you, here's how you know if you have 60 against the salt. If you have in the rest of the content of the pot the exact same volume you have as the piece of meat, which was salted, but you forgot to rinse it off, forgot to wash it off, everything's okay. Because the Ramah estimates because if you have the piece of meat itself, plus in the content of the pot you have other content that's the same volume as the piece of meat, you're definitely going to have between the two of them 60 against the salt. Why? The Ramah estimates that a piece of meat itself is going to be 30 times the size of its surface. So if you have a piece of meat covered in salt, that piece of meat is already 30 times the amount of salt. So you're already halfway to 60. So as soon as the rest of the pot has vegetables, potatoes, or other meat that's the same size or same volume as the piece of meat that was salted, from which you forgot to wash off the salt, then the piece of meat, which is 30 times the amount of the salt, and the rest of the content of the pot, which is the same size of the meat, and therefore is also 30 times the size of the salt, then you know you have 60. Simple calculation. The meat is 30 times the salt on its surface. The rest of the pot is the same size as the meat. That equals 60 times the amount of the salt, and you're good to go. Continues the Ramah the lake shishim b'kader neged melech. You don't have 60 against the salt. So, okay, you have blood, non-kosher blood in that salt because you forgot to wash it off the meat. Right? You had a piece of meat you salted. You forgot to wash off the salt, as we described before, the 3 times, or you didn't do it at all, and now you threw it into a boiling pot. You don't have 60. You started cooking that piece of meat. You don't have 60 in the whole pot, the content of the pot. You don't have 60 against the salt. Everything's non-kosher. The Ramah adds, even if you only put it into a klisheni, which means like this, you took that piece of meat, which is totally salted, and it's covered in salt now because you didn't wash it off, and you didn't put it into a soup that's on the stove. You put it into a bowl of soup, so it's a klisheni, right? It's a bowl of soup that's on your plate. That bowl you didn't cook the soup in that bowl. The soup was cooked in a pot and put into the bowl. So this bowl is a kli sheni. And then you took that piece of meat, which was with the salt on it, that has blood on that salt, and you put it into the soup. And you don't have in the whole soup and the meat 60 times the salt. Then said the Ramah, Hakol also everything is forbidden. Even though we already learned in Taruvas that kli sheni does not cause cooking to such a degree that it makes the flavor go everywhere. The bahir, the macha sheish melech b'tzir, because we have the juices of the meat and we have the salt of the meat, most importantly, then even kli sheni will cook. So salt on its own won't do cooking to cause the blood to go back in, especially if there's water that blunts the flavor of the salt, blunts the power of the salt. Kli sheni won't cause cooking, as you learned in Taruvas, the laws of kli sheni, when you have non-kosher falling into a kli sheni. Here, you have non-kosher blood, which is inside the salt, mixing into a kli sheni. So the kli sheni itself isn't hot enough to cause the blood to be absorbed in everything and to be cooked through and everything. But kli sheni plus salt will cause the transference of flavor throughout that bowl, and therefore you have to have 60 against the salt. And if you don't, the salt, the whole bowl is non-kosher, considering the blood that's in it. Now continues the Rama. Basa yavesh, and dried meat. Explains the Rishach what this means. What do you mean dried out meat? What he means here is like this. You have a piece of meat. You salted it. You didn't wash it off. That's the subject of our sif. You forgot to wash off the salt. And you left it like that. And now it dried out. The meat dried out and the salt dried out. So you have some little bit of blood that's dried out mixed into the salt. Then says the Ramah, you definitely have 60 in the meat. In the meat. You didn't cook it yet. It's just in the meat. The meat itself is definitely 60 times the amount of the salt. Considering that the salt already dried out. So it's interesting. I mentioned this on Sunday. I'm not really sure exactly why, but it seems like we're just accepting this as a premise that once the salt dries out, I guess it shrinks. It doesn't have the water in it, so it shrinks in size. And if the meat before it dried out was 30 times the amount of salt that's on it, then once the salt dries out, that meat becomes 60 times. I guess the salt shrinks to half its size. And therefore, the meat will definitely be 60 times the amount of salt. And therefore, if you forgot to wash off the salt and you left it there dried out, and then you cooked it, it's going to be fine because the meat itself already is 60 times the salt. But continues the Shulchan Aruch, what I just told you is based on the Shach. Continues the Ramah, but in the first instance, one should be careful, even if the meat dried out with the salt that you forgot to wash off. In the first instance, be careful, not to cook it, or don't even wash it. Don't wash off your meat, especially if the salt is dried out. Don't do that with hot water, which the hand recoils from, which has the cooking capacity. Without first washing off the salt after having salted it, which is what you're supposed to do, as we learned earlier today. Now continues there. All of this is true only if you didn't do any washing, right? We learned before you're supposed to do 3 washings. However, the 3 washings are divided, as you learned from the Shaka, the Tar, the Ramah, the Machabed, whole discussion. But you have to do a whole series of washing, right? Rinsing, shaking, and then 2 washings or 3 washings. So everything we just said now about meat that dried out after salting before you washed off the salt is only if you didn't wash it off at all. But if you only washed it off once, you didn't do it all 3 times as you were supposed to. You didn't do the whole process mentioned before. You only did 1 washing. And then you cooked it like that without doing the 2nd washing. With the 3rd washing, mutter, it's totally fine. Why? Because as we already learned, this whole washing it 2 or 3 times is a big chumrah. And in the first instance, all you need to do is just 1 washing. So once you do not in the first instance, at the basic minimum, you do 1 washing to remove the salt. So once you've done the 1 washing to remove the salt, even though you haven't done the other ones, and then it dried out, you cooked it, don't worry about it, it's fine. All of the concerns mentioned before, or even if it didn't dry out, if you just forgot to do the 2nd washing, and after 1 washing you cooked it, it was still wet, it didn't dry out. It's for sure still fine. All the discussion before about when you forgot to remove it and you have to have 60 against the salt is only true if you didn't remove the salt at all. You didn't do any washing. But if you did the first washing, you did 1, that's enough. And when you cook it later, you won't have to have 60 times against it because you've done the basic washing of the salt, washing to remove the salt. Continues the Ramah, salt which was used once to remove blood. Don't use that salt again to wash, to extract blood from another piece of meat. Just from the fact that he says this, you have to imagine that people had a lot of salt in their house. Because if you're serving meat to your family, I don't know, I guess people didn't give that much, but if you're wanting to give every member of your family one chicken leg, you have to salt every single piece, and each one has to be salted with a different with other salt. You can't use one salt for twice. So once you've used it, you can't use it again. And certainly you cannot eat that salt. You can't just put that salt for your challah bowl, on your bowl to dip your challah into. That salt is no longer usable. However, says the Shach, if you did use the salt to salt a second piece of meat, then it's fine. He's quoting the Teres Achatas, which is from the Ramah. Okay, what does he mean b'diavad? That b'diavad, if I use the same salt twice, it's okay. So explains the Shach, b'diavad means that you salted one piece of meat, took the salt off, shook it off, scraped it off. Now you have a whole bunch of salt. Used it to salt a second piece of meat. Shouldn't have done that. Right now, it's still not b'diavad. Right now, what you can do is wash off that salt and start over again. Salt it with fresh salt, right? It's not b'diavad yet because you can still fix it. That's what the Shach says. So if I salted a piece of meat, use that salt again for a second piece of meat, it's not b'diavad yet. Because just take that salt off and start the process over with fresh salt. B'diavad means that if I salted one piece of meat, took the salt off, salted a second piece of meat, took that salt off, and now took that second piece of meat and cooked it. That's called b'diavad. It's too late. I can't salt it again. So I can rely on the salting that I did with the secondhand salt, even though I shouldn't have, but I can rely on it after that meat's already been cooked. But before the meat's cooked, if you just salted it with secondhand salt and you haven't cooked it yet, that's not b'diavad. Get the salt off and start over again with fresh salt. Now, the Shach also quotes the following. He quotes a book called Afbeid Avrubi, which says that if the salt is totally dried out, you could eat it. Once the salt's totally dried out, you could use it for your bowl on Shabbos to dip your challah into, because it's dried out, the blood's not there anymore. However, the Shach is questioning whether or not this is a reliable heter, especially considering that the Ramah said before that when the salt is dried out, why is it mutter? Because you have 60 against it. If dried out salt is mutter to eat, then why would you have to have 60 against it? So the fact that the Ramah says that when salt is dried out, you have 60 in the meat against it, that's why it's okay, indicates that the salt itself is not okay. And it's only because you have 60 against it that the meat is okay. So the Shach is questioning this book called Afbeid Avrubi, the sefer called Afbeid Avrubi, in arguing that one is allowed to use salt that was used to salt meat after it's been dried out. Okay, Yud. Interesting halacha that we spoke about on Sunday. Trusting a non-Jew. Goy mishamek beis Yisrael. If a person has help, a non-Jewish help, it's in his house, in a Jewish house, and also and the non-Jew cooked your meat. Then you do a medichah. You don't know if he washed it. You did the salting. You're from Jew. You salted your meat. But then your help in the house went along with the rest of the cooking process and cooked your meat. You turned on the stove, so it's Bishul Yisrael. Yeah? But you don't know if he washed the salt off before he cooked it. So it says the Shulchan Aruch, if the Jew knows the way, if the guy knows the way Jews behave, and he knows Jews wash their salt, you can rely on him when he says, I salted it, I washed it off. You can rely on him when he says, I washed off the salt. On one condition, says Shulchan Aruch, so long as you have a Jew, even a child, coming in and out of the kitchen where this guy is doing his work, or this lady's doing his work. Because then he's afraid to he's just afraid at one point someone's going to walk in and watch him put a salty piece of meat into the pot. And because he's afraid, mirtas, that's the Gemara's language, mirtas, he's afraid to be caught doing the wrong thing, because he knows that you have to remove the salt. You have to wash it off before you put it in to cook. So then when he says, I washed it off, you can trust him, because we know he was afraid. But the Ramah adds another thing, another possibility of trusting him, even if he's not afraid. One of two options. It says the Ramah, either one is okay. Either what? Either or the guy speaks nonchalantly, which means he's not being questioned. Did you do what you're supposed to? If he's doing that, then you probably lie. But he's speaking nonchalantly. And if he's speaking nonchalantly, then we believe him. If he says I washed it off very well, and he's speaking so casually, not in an inquisitive nature, then you believe him, even if we didn't have someone walking in and out of the room for him to be afraid. Or option B, and if a Jew or even a child, a minor, is going in and out the mirtas because he's afraid, considering that he knows the custom of Jews. So that I'm saying you have other two options. The Shulchan Aruch seems to say, and as the Shach explains, that Rama rejects the idea of believing in Messiah L'Pitumah. Messiah L'Pitumah means speaking casually. The Mechaber rejects that and says you have to have the goy be afraid because someone's walking in. If he's speaking nonchalantly, it's not enough for the Mechaber. The Rama says one or the other. Either he's afraid because someone's walking in and out, he's afraid to be caught, then you believe him when he says he washed it, or he speaks casually. An interesting discussion that comes up in the Shach is the Prisha and the Bach, we mentioned this on Sunday, they're of the view that if the guy works in your house and he knows the rules, then he's going to lie because he knows the rules. The Shach rejects that and says, first of all, the Shach rejects that by saying he could still be speaking nonchalantly even though he knows the rules and we don't suspect him of being lying. If he's talking to someone who's not the owner of the house, he's talking to somebody else and he speaks nonchalantly, we believe him. But I don't know, we saw this on Sunday, I can't find it here, but on Sunday we said there's an opinion which says that if he works for you, he wants to do the right thing. He doesn't want to be fired. And if he knows that you expect it to be washed, it's more reason to trust him, not more reason to assume he's going to lie. Okay. Continues the Rama Miyu, however, if you told your help, please don't wash off the meat unless I tell you, because you want to be there when it happens, or whatever reason. You tell him, please don't do that step. And he doesn't listen to you. He went ahead and cooked the meat. And he tells you, oh yeah, you told me not to wash it, but I did wash it. Then also the meat's forbidden. Because we can see he's not afraid of you. And when you told him expressly not to wash off the meat, he claims he did. So you can't trust him anymore. And therefore you can't trust his word when he says, I washed it off. Okay, Yudalef. Meat that was cooked without salting. So the last case we had was the person salted the meat, forgot to remove the salt, forgot to wash it off, and then cooked it. So then you'd have to have 60 against the salt, because the meat blood is in the salt. But in this case, it's the meat was not salted at all, and then you cooked it. So now you have to have 60. So you have to have 60 against the entire piece of meat. Then everything's okay. We learned on Sunday that there's an opinion in the Rishonim which say that I did, which said you don't have to have 60 against the whole piece of meat because the blood in the meat is much smaller than the size of the meat itself. However, the Shulchan Aruch and the Rama is ruling like the Rosh, and the Rosh is of the view that because we don't know how much blood comes out of any piece of meat, you got to go to the max volume. And the max volume is the entire size of the piece of meat. And therefore, meat, which you forgot to salt and was cooked, you have to have 60 in the pot against the entire piece of meat. And then everything's okay. Okay. It's not clear from the Mechaber. When he says everything's okay, does he mean even that piece of meat? Because there is an opinion, as we learned on Sunday, there's an opinion brought in the Rosh that if you have 60 against the size of the meat, then the meat itself is okay because the blood is equally distributed throughout the entire pot. Let's say you took the piece of meat that you didn't salt, threw it into a cholent, and the entire cholent is bigger than that piece of meat. So there's an opinion which says that the blood that was in that piece of meat equally distributes throughout the entire pot of cholent. And because the cholent is 60 times the ratio, it's totally fine, even that piece of meat. However, says the Rama, that piece of meat, there are those who say it's forbidden to eat that piece of meat. Even though there's 60 in the entire cholent to the ratio of that one piece of meat. But that one piece of meat is considered forbidden because the blood does not equally distribute throughout the entirety of the cholent pot. The blood will distribute throughout the pot, and therefore you have to have 60 against the piece of meat, but the blood will most probably stay inside the meat, even though it moves around inside the meat. And because it moves around, that becomes usr, as we learned in our first year, that the blood has to move from its place in order for it to become usr. So the cooking will cause the blood to move within the meat, but it will mostly stay in the meat. And because it mostly stays in the meat, that piece of meat is usr, while the rest of the pot is okay, because the rest of the pot is 60 times the ratio of that piece of meat. This is based on the Shach and the Taz, that little explanation I just gave you. And this is our practice. Unless you have some need why you need that piece of meat. Right? So maybe you need that piece of meat. Why would you need a piece of meat? Go get covered Shabbos. Because this is your only meat for your cholent. And in Shabbos, a person has to have meat. It's one piece of meat. So then, because of 60 in the whole cholent against the meat, we can rely on the opinion which says that the blood is equally distributed throughout the entire pot, and that piece of meat will be okay on Shabbos. Or guests. You have a guest coming, you got to serve him a slice of meat. You only have 10 slices of meat, and you have 10 guests. You don't have, God forbid, one guest without a piece of meat. And that one piece of meat wasn't salted. If the pot in which that meat was cooked is 60 times the ratio of the piece of meat, then you can rely on the lenient opinions that say that the blood was equally distributed throughout the entire pot, and that piece of meat is kosher to serve to your guest. And then you can rely on the more lenient opinions. Continues Ramah, if you salted the meat, but you didn't salt it properly. What does it mean not salted properly? Either one of two things. Either you salted it, but it didn't sit in the salt long enough. We learned that it should be at least, 18 minutes? The Ramah said it should be an hour, but at least 18 minutes. So you didn't salt it long enough. Or you salted it, but you didn't cover the entire surface. Now, this second option, as being considered not salting properly, is only according to the opinions which we looked about last week, which say that you have to cover every single surface area, and if you didn't, it's not good. The Ramah says if you didn't cover every single surface area, it's still okay. So therefore, we're left with, this is what I'm telling you is from the Taz, what we're left with here is that when the Ramah says that the meat wasn't salted properly, he means you didn't leave it in the salt long enough. Okay, so you didn't leave the meat in the salt long enough. You treat it as if it wasn't salted. If you didn't leave the meat in the salt long enough, it's as if it was never salted. Right? According to the opinion, we say every single surface area of the salt has to be covered. If it wasn't, we would also say it's not salted. But again, as we learned last week, the Ramah is of the view that if you didn't salt every single inch of it, if you didn't salt it totally fully, it's still okay as long as you salted one side, as we learned last week. But if you didn't salt it for long enough, that's considered as if it wasn't salted at all. Continues the Ramah. Likewise, if you left meat without being salted for 3 days, after limlach, even though after 3 days you salted it, we treat it as if you didn't salt it at all. As we're going to learn in the next sif, after 3 days, the blood gets stuck inside the meat, and it won't come out anymore. So you can't salt it after 3 days. It has to be salted within 3 days of shechting. So if I forgot to do that, I didn't salt it within 3 days of shechting, it's as if I never salted it, and therefore, if I went ahead and cooked it, even though I salted it afterwards, but because I failed to do so in the first 3 days, even if I salted it on day 4, if I cooked it after that salting, you have to have 60 against that piece of meat, because it's as if that meat was never salted, considering it wasn't done in the first 3 days, even though it was done on day 4. Likewise, if you salted meat for less than 18 minutes, so it's considered as if it was never salted, and then you went in and cooked that meat, you'd have to have 60 against the entire piece of meat, because it's as if the blood never left the meat. Your base. Meat which was left alone 3 days straight without salting it, the blood is dried up inside of it, inside the meat. It's no longer going to come out through salting it. And therefore, you cannot go ahead and cook that piece of meat. Ella, here's your only option. If you forgot to salt meat and it's past 3 days, too late to do salting, what you can do is, the only thing you can do is salting. You can grill it. Because grilling has a capacity to extract blood, because it's not in a bowl, it's being direct flame. It's like, it's in a spit or it's on a grill with its open flame. So the meat will drop out, will be drawn out. And because the blood will be drawn out of the meat, even if it wasn't salted in 3 days. So in other words, take this. Blood can come out of the meat after 3 days, but only through grilling. Salting must be within the first 3 days. Now says if you have this meat, which you didn't salt for 3 days, 3 days passed, so you can't salt it anymore. You grilled it. And then don't cook it afterwards, because we're afraid that maybe the cooking will have a process of pulling out more blood. So the grilling taka made blood come out, which is fine. But then when you cook it, more blood's going to come out, which is a problem. And therefore, says the Ramah, don't cook it after it's been grilled. But if you did go ahead and do cook it, it's okay. Because at the end of the day, the grilling takes care of it. So even if you grilled it first, so you didn't salt it for 3 days, you can't salt it anymore. You grilled it, blood came out. You shouldn't have cooked it, because maybe more blood's going to come out. But you did cook it. it's okay because most probably all the blood came out in the grilling, as explained by the shach. Now, there's an interesting discussion here. Okay, let's continue. If during this 3-day period you let it sit in water during that 3-day period after shechting, then the clock resets. So you shechted meat, and on day 2 you put it in water. Now your 3-day count resets on day 2. So now you can go to 5 days after it was shechted. A little less than a half an hour. It's not the full 3 days, full 3 days minus half an hour. Or as the shach says, it doesn't have to be a half an hour, just any short amount of time, less than 3 days. So when you put it in water, it resets the clock. Okay, how much water do you have to put it into, and how long does it have to sit in there for it to reset the clock? So he says, quote, there's Taz quotes the book called u'LeMaaseh, which says it's got to sit in water, actually soak in water. Just rinsing it will not reset the clock. It has to be soaked. So the rinsing that butchers do will not reset the clock. It has to be soaked. It has to be actually soaked in water. It doesn't say how long, but it's got to be soaked in there. Now, the u'LeMaaseh continues that lechatchila, wait, that was the Taz I quoted from the u'LeMaaseh. Sorry. The Taz continues and says, but if you, let's say you did nikur, you extracted all the veins from the meat within 3 days, then even rinsing will be enough to reset the clock. Because there's not really much blood for the meat to absorb because you already extracted the veins. So if you extract the veins, then the rinsing itself will reset the clock. But otherwise, it has to actually soak in meat. This was the Taz. Now the shach says like this, that if a person shouldn't lechatchila put it in water to reset the clock, unless if it's okay, unless there's some sort of shatzat, you need to save this meat for a wedding coming up, and you want to reset the clock, and you don't have time to salt it, so you can soak it in water to reset the clock, so that you can have it for some time later. But otherwise, in lechatchila, you shouldn't put it in water to reset the clock of 3 days. And the shach concludes that you have to be machmer in this din of not salting after 3 days in any situation because we don't have this source in the Gemara. Okay, that's a Gimel. For final sif for today, your Daled. If you left a piece of meat for 3 days without salting it. And now, again, we learned too late, you can't salt it anymore, you have to grill it. That's the only way out. Says the Shulchan Aruch, what if you didn't do that? And now this piece of meat, which is not salted, you left it 3 days, and now it's mixed with other pieces of meat, and those other pieces of meat were properly salted, let's say. Okay, the different ways of understanding what this mixture means, but let's just go with that. They were properly salted. Batal b'roiv, it's batal and roiv, right? Because we learned already in Taurus that yavish b'yavish, when you have one piece of non-kosher meat mixed in with 2 other kosher pieces of meat, all pieces of meat are treated kosher, right? We had the machlekes, we have to take one out or eat one at a time, but they're batal b'roiv, right? You have 3 pieces of meat, two is kosher, one's not kosher, you're not sure which one's which, all are considered kosher because it's nullified by the majority. So here too, one piece of meat that wasn't salted, it's past 3 days, other pieces of meat were treated properly. What I'm telling you now is basically on the shach. Then it's one non-kosher meat mixed with 2 kosher pieces of meat. Everything's kosher. With u'LeMaaseh, you can cook them all. Even if the piece of meat was a u'LeMaaseh, it's a piece of meat that's considered precious enough that you would serve to a guest. Which ordinarily, in Taurus, the piece of meat which is worthy of sharing is never nullified even in 1,000. So why is this one nullified 1 in 3? Because in this case, this piece of meat is not kosher. This piece of meat is perfectly kosher. The blood in it is not kosher, and the blood is not something you would serve to a guest. Therefore, the blood will be nullified. The blood that's in the meat will be nullified in the majority because it's 1 piece of meat against 2 kosher pieces of meat. So even though this piece of meat is u'LeMaaseh, worthy of serving, and if the piece of meat itself were not kosher, it would be never nullified. But the piece of meat here is fine. It's the blood that's inside the meat that's the problem. And therefore, it could get nullification. As we learned there, that the fact that chaticha royal iskabet is never nullified is only if the piece itself is not kosher. But if the piece itself is absorbed of something else that's not kosher, then it will be nullified. And that's what the case over here. It's a piece of meat that's absorbed the blood, which is not kosher, and therefore could be nullified. Now, the same thing is true is if a unsalted piece of meat was cooked and then got mixed into two other cooked pieces of meat. Here too, nullified the majority. One kosher piece of meat, two non-kosher pieces of meat. All three have been cooked, two cooked properly, one cooked without salting, so it's not kosher. But because it's one piece of meat and two pieces of meat, not mixed in a stew where you require 60, it's dry, it's yavish biyavish, it's dry non-kosher mixed with two dry koshers, then all you need is the majority. Okay, that's our quota for this week. With Hashem, on Sunday, we will do our introduction to our final quota, our final week of Smicha this year. Have a wonderful evening, Eden.